Volume 4 C50 Epilogue. Epilogue. Yaldabaoth's howl of anger and frustration as he vanished under the king's magic was drowned out by two things. The howls of the banished demon army as the object summoning them was crushed, and the cheers of the army of dwarves, dragons, and quaggas who had been fighting along the edge of the abyss mere moments before. Their swords, claws, mauls, and axes were raised as one to the black sky as their collective master descended from above after his victorious battle against the one who would have slain them to the last infant or hatchling of any race. And when he touched the ground again, one noble foot gracing the stone floor before the great rift, the dragons bowed their heads, while the dwarves and quagga knelt in submission to his will. "You have victory," Ainz declared and raised a hand in triumph. The cheer renewed, but for all the whoops, howls, and roars, there was more to be done. It took hours to dispose of the dead, casting the corpses into the great rift where they were always disposed of, and the healers ran out of mana long before they ran out of wounded, forcing the use of most of the potion supplies and then still requiring the use of more passive non-magical treatments. However, when it was all over and done, there was still even more to do, but it was the work only a king could perform. Seeing to the peace. Ainz held both hands over his head then, his fingers out to call for quiet. A moment of silence for the dead who paid the price for your lives, and for the peace that is to follow. You are all my people now. Dwarf. Frost Dragon. Quagga. I will not see war return here again. You were all allies once, in the long, long ago. Now you've fought together again, and I hope you understand why you were allies. Dragons, he pointed to the former concubines and their children. You are strong, one of the strongest beings alive. But you cannot make much of anything as you are. You need these smaller ones to make your lives the sort you want to live. But now I forbid you to oppress them, so you must trade. Trade? The concubines and children asked as one. Yes. Ainz didn't avert his stare from their wide-eyed confusion. My kingdom is growing, that means trade will flourish, people, messages, and goods of the sort you want, will go all over the place. If you slaughter a cow you may eat it today, but it will bear no calves tomorrow. I will put you to use in long-range trade and travel. You will take money and goods for what you do, and while you may not take to it at first, Ainz smirked and removed his mask, when you're rich from it, I don't think you'll mind. Now to you. Peri Euro. You lost many of your people fighting, and lost many on the way here. Now control over the whole mountain is lost to you. But your people still have a future. There are many mountains, and I'm sure not all of them are inhabited. You will return to your homes, and be provided what you need to survive. Then when I have secured another range, one with no threats to you, your people will be relocated there. Peri Euro gasped in disbelief. An entire mountain? A whole one to ourselves? Yes, your majesty. Was all he could muster out. By the god of Oz. What if he decided to just? That was a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his days, and keep him working such long hours for the rest of his life that quagga and work ethic would become a thing of legend long after his passing. Now, to the dwarves, we have our agreement, and I will keep it. The runesmiths will go with me as we discussed, but they will come back here yearly to show off their work, meet their families, friends, and spend money. Probably on beer. Ainz chuckled a little, and the dwarves collectively shared in his amusement with laughter of their own. Gorndo Firebeard, Ainz said, and from somewhat farther back, the dwarf stood up. My lord, he exclaimed, moving so quickly that his helmet toppled off his head and crashed with a clatter to the stone at his feet. You kept the craft that saved your people alive. You are the one who stayed faithful to your trade. You will lead runecraft development in my country until you retire. Ainz promised, and Gorndo let out a squeal of excitement that saw the little dwarf jump up and down in sheer joy. Around him, other dwarves were looking at him with envy and giving resounding congratulations which lasted until Ainz turned and pointed to Heginmil. You, Heginmil, will return with me. I will put you into service under one of my guardians. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to see you. Be good to her, she's a dear child of mine, Ainz said, and Heginmil bowed deeply, lowering his head to the stone. There are ample books for you to read, and her brother is an avid reader as well. I think you'll enjoy it there on the 6th floor of my home. My lord is kind and generous, I'm grateful, Heginmil replied. Now, I will stay for one day to celebrate with you, and then I must get back to my home. I have a bigger country to run now, and I can't neglect my work forever. Ainz chuckled and shrugged, and again those around him shared his laughter. True to his word, the rest of the day was spent drinking heavily by most of all sides, with the dragons consuming entire casks of ale on their own, and the Quaggas learning just why the dwarves liked alcohol so much. When morning came and most of the city was passed out, Ainz opened the gate. Quadwall was quietly carried through by Hedgenmal, where his body could be studied and potentially healed with both intact with the help of 9th tier healing spells. The runesmiths were all present with their immediate wives and children, while the rest of their families appeared and saw them off. They hiked through the whirling vortex with contented waves and excited steps, eager to see what future awaited them all, and eager to see the 18-rune sword again as a fixture on the wall of the promised workshop. A thing to aspire to, a challenge from the past to the future that would never be out of sight. Gaunder was the last of them to enter the void. "You've done a marvelous thing for me, Your Majesty. I don't know much about gods, but I promised you my soul, so I guess." He stroked his rust-colored beard. "I guess that makes you god enough for me. I'm yours forever, thank you." Before Ainz could say "you're welcome," as if he were embarrassed by the outpouring of thanks and the tears that went with it, Gaunder rushed through the gate after the others. With the families gone and the room empty, Ainz made a quick guess and said, "You can come out, Demiurge." "My lord is impossible to deceive, even by accident," Demiurge said, and gave his lord an affectionate smile. He knelt before his father, his king and his reason to be, and bowed his head. "Was I useful? Did I do well?" Ainz gave a quiet nod. "Yes. But some of your experiments." Ainz frantically wanted to say, "I didn't want that," or "that wasn't what I meant." But it would shatter the perception Demiurge had of him, and yet it couldn't go unremarked on either. Ainz's very human conscience clawed at him. So he split the difference. "I think they weren't quite subtle enough. So much pain and torture is it's pointless and even gets in the way of accomplishing long-term goals. Try to be more subtle in the future. ... Replace blatant torture with subtle torment to obscure the involvement of the Supreme Being from any implications of his connection." Of course, how negligent of me, Demiurge thought with vigorous self-recrimination. But out loud he said, "Of course, my lord. I understand perfectly." "Ah, good, let's go through now, there's a lot of work to be done," Ainz quipped, and they stepped through the gate to return home again, leaving the city, and the drunkards from dragon to dwarf to Quagga to wake up alone and see to his final orders. When he returned to the throne room, clad in his mask still, expectant faces, tense with watchfulness and waiting, dropped as they relaxed. The Guardians and Pleiades, plus Sabos, one and all awaited him. Only Albedo's face lacked that same tension. She stood at the front, wearing only her normal tranquil knowing smile. They dropped one and all to their knees and bowed their heads. Albedo was the one to address them. "Welcome back, my lord. Your servants have missed you these long months," she said to him. At Ainz's back sat the stairway to the throne. He glanced away from them, up to the rising stone to the seat of power. "Hail to the king over Nazarick." Her words were instantly cut off. "No," Demiurge said, stopping her with such suddenness that she dropped her jaw, the bare beginnings of impossible wrath in her bright yellow eyes, which was shared by the others. Demiurge saw their faces, from Sabos to Little Mare. Nothing was worse than defiance like that. He cut them off and said, "My lord, the throne of kings awaits you. Our All-Father." Demiurge's words sent a wave of shock through the Guardians. "Cocytus, you said once before that king was too small a title for our mighty lord. During my journey I found the right one. This land has emperors, kings, queens, pontifex and princes. But the titles of others would only diminish our master. I propose a proper title. Who he truly is, to us, and to all those in the world who fall under his rule. All-Father, All-Father, All-Father." The quiet title was whispered among the Guardians as they tried it out. The words formed slowly on their tongues as Ainz ascended the stairs and turned around to put his back to the chair. "Hail to the All-Father, Ainz Ulgaun." The cry began with Demiurge as soon as he knelt in his place among their numbers, and when he bowed his head, the others, from Lupus Regina who knew first, to Albedo who knew not, the cry of loyalty filled the throne room, filling the white-robed Ainz with equal parts relief and very human anxiety. When it finally stopped, he looked down to Albedo and said, "Your report, Albedo. I'm sure we have a lot to do." "At once, my lord," she said with a smile. Months earlier, Roble Holy Kingdom. Naya sat alone in the darkness, far too close to the demi-human border for her liking. If they hadn't caught you letting those demi-human infants live, you wouldn't be here wondering when demi-humans were going to murder you, she told herself, and poked the little fire that offered the only light other than the stars above. Whether she was telling the truth or a lie, she wasn't sure. You'd probably be here anyway, father's curse again, she thought, and ran her fingers over her vicious eyes, briefly closing her eyelids while sparks crackled below her little stew pot. From a practical perspective, starting a fire while scouting this far in the wild lands alone was stupid. Stupid and dangerous. But Naya was past caring, squire or not, she had no bonds that would call others to help her. If I'm being abandoned on an assignment like this, I might as well have a hot meal before the end, she reasoned, and then opened her eyes, stuck a wooden spoon in the little pot, and took a sip. The flavor of rabbit and wild vegetables was sharp, but not half bad. But any thoughts on the quality of her meal were dispelled when she heard a cry overhead and saw a massive object sail past through the dark and land with a thunderous crash not far away. "What in the name of the four?" she exclaimed. She quickly smothered her fire, snatched her bow up from beside herself, and ran through the trees and bushes as fast and quietly as she could. The dark leaves smacked her face and roots threatened but failed to trip the adroit squire. She avoided things around her as best she could, her scary eyes at least good for seeing somewhat better than average in the dark. She came close to the noise of the crash when she heard the sound of an agonized groan. Almost blubbering, whatever it is, it's alive, and it's in pain. She nocked an arrow and approached the noise, and then gasped when she saw a frost dragon on its back. Covered in burns, with a multitude of broken bones, a clearly shattered jaw, agony filled its single, hopeless eye. Naya's heart raced in her breast. Whether it saw her, or smelled her first, she didn't know, but when it saw her knocked bow it immediately spoke. "Don't kill. Help me," it begged. It looked away after meeting her eyes. "Please. Begging you. Help me." Naya lowered her bow. The thing looked so damn sad. She glanced back the way she'd come. None of my own people for 100 kilometers at least. No demi-humans either. "Naya. You're being stupid. He's a dragon, he'll eat you for sure. Please." It begged again while looking at her upside down. She put away her bow. "The four must truly hate me. But what else is new?" Naya mumbled and put away the arrow in her quiver again. She then put the bow on her back and sighed. "All right. Let's start by setting these bones. This is going to hurt. But first, promise me you will not eat me," Naya said, and the dragon stammered. "Olisar Dark promises on his name. Won't eat savior." "That'll have to do," Naya said with resignation. Her shoulders slumped briefly as she contemplated the likely end of her life after the dragon recovered, if it did. "This is stupid, he's a dragon," she thought, but all the rest of her saw was a broken mass of pain, weakness, desperation, in need of help. And so she clambered up to the broken leg to get started. "I'm no healer, and any healer I could fetch would just report you and have you killed, so I'm going to have to do this the slow way. Setting the bones is going to hurt like a demon's fire. Are you ready?" she asked when she reached the broken leg. The dragon gave a quiet nod. "If you only knew," he thought as the human grabbed the bone, activated a strength-enhancing martial art, and got started. Volume 5 C1 Unholy Kingdom. The One Who Stayed, Unholy Kingdom. Volume 5 in the series The One Who Stayed. Naya went up to check the frost dragon's leg again. Standing on so large a creature's belly had become shockingly routine these last few weeks, or has it been months? She wondered. Scouting the wild areas away from the wall had a way of making time lose all meaning. "Does it hurt?" she asked her patient. "Not as much as it did. Not nearly as much." The dragon growled out. His pride was keeping him from being totally truthful, but with only him to talk to, she'd come to gradually understand what truly underlie his words. "It's a lot easier to take care of you if you just tell me straight." Naya critiqued the monster and patted the splintered section. "It's never easier to let go of my pride as a dragon." Olisar Dark replied with a wince and a growl. "Uh-huh." Naya replied, "Well, it looks good, but I'm not ready to take off the splint yet. Now I'm going to check the other injury sites. I'm going to have to go farther afield if I want to get enough herbs to pack those parts, so I may be late getting back. Would you like to eat now, or wait?" she asked, and the dragon rolled slowly onto his side so that his legs were laid out facing in the same direction. Now is better, he said. As long as it isn't me. I've heard from some women that it feels great to be eaten, but I don't think this is what they have in mind. Naya laughed at the ribald joke, but the dragon only looked down at her with curious eyes. The fearsome-eyed human's sense of humor was terrible and confusing by turns, but over the weeks of her caring for him in secret, he came to appreciate it as something familiar. The way his middle son tried to make jokes with his brothers. The humor of the outcast. While he had little enough pity for his foolish son, he's probably dead by now, and so are the rest of them. My whole clan. Gone. The realization still hit him harder than he expected. Though it was strange enough to see something of the young male in a human woman. Even in his way of seeing her, she had vicious, evil-looking eyes that left a shudder just to look at them, and yet she was clearly very weak relative to himself. Not that it has stopped me from needing her, though I can't very well say it. He thought as she went out of view and returned with a large haunch of venison over her shoulder. I'm going to have to hunt for more of this on my way back. This is the last of my supply. Thankfully the game is pretty thick around here. The only real danger is demi-human bands. Will you be okay on your own for the night? She asked. Curiously, she sounded genuinely worried about him. The broken dragon opened his mouth, his tongue snaked out, snatched the haunch of bright red meat and drew it into his mouth a moment later. He chewed it 3 times and swallowed with an audible gulp. Yes. My breath still works, even if my wings don't, and I can't stand all the way. Olisar Dark responded, and then waited while she grunted and pulled herself up his body to check out his broken wings. The stitching has come loose. Are you scratching again? She rebuked the dragon and he hung his head a little bit at the open statement of his weakness to that cursed itch. It itches. Was the closest he was going to get to an admission. If you want to fly again, you'll have to put up with it. Naya quipped and began to tighten the thin threads she made from a replacement bowstring. Her nimble fingers were accustomed to this now. A few parts of his wings were already healed, but others were slower. The knitting of the leathery skin didn't come along as well when he kept using one of his good legs or even rocks on the ground to rub against the injuries. The dragon grunted under her. Naya's fear that he might eat her when she was no longer needed was now largely abated. At worst he's more likely to just fly off and leave, but it would be nice to say goodbye to him. He was the closest thing she'd had to a friend in a very long time, which was strange enough given that if they'd met under different circumstances she was quite sure he'd have made her into a snack. Then again, I would have tried to kill him too, so who am I to judge? She shrugged that thought off and kept her footing as sure as possible. Don't be such a baby, she said when he winced. Wings are sensitive, he insisted. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't get you a healer. I swear, men of every race, you're happy to charge into battle against whole armies of demons and the gods know what else, but one little injury when someone is around to nurse you back to health, and you will turn into giant babies. Naya snorted and kept the stitching going under the rocking of the body under her feet. Her nimble fingers got the job done again. Practice had improved her considerably, and she flopped down on her butt and then slid down the length of his ice blue scales to land adroitly on the ground with a little finishing hop at the end. Okay, just don't move around if you don't have to, Isla. Handle cleanup when I get back. At least there's a creek nearby. Naya didn't look at his face when she said it, and there was no answer the dragon could give for that embarrassing necessity, not even a grunt of acknowledgement. She beat a hasty retreat, disappearing into the woods beyond the clearing he made when he landed. Broken, shattered trees were still scattered about, though much reduced now as she made a point of using them for firewood. The hours passed in dull boredom. That leaf makes 1027. That leaf makes 1028. That leaf makes 1029. That leaf makes 1031. Oh wait. I miscounted. I'd better start all over again. Again, he said in a monotone and began counting the leaves for the 4th time in a row. I keep sabotaging myself. He thought with annoyance. He'd never once lost count when it came to his hoarded treasures. But counting that was bliss, and this was not. The sun made its slow passage across the sky, and in the shadows when the darkness took hold, the dragon could see the watching eyes of creatures that longed for him to weaken or die. Wolves, bears, even small monsters that wouldn't trouble even a common beast. Even a barghest or two had its smell reach his nose. but his human scent was far enough away that he could no longer detect her. Unusual, he thought. She didn't tend to stray far from him, not since she'd begun to treat his wounds. Has she gone to report my presence? That question he'd asked himself more than once. Hostile humans were not much of a threat except for a rare few heroes. But they could be brave, relentless, and he was still not especially mobile. Surviving a demon emperor, only to be killed by petty humans, what a twisted irony. The former clan lord of great aspirations mused, and relaxed. He no longer believed she intended any harm. If she did, why feed my great self? Why split and bandage my limbs? Why sew my wings? Why clean me? So, the thought of what she might do was quickly set aside. More interesting in his mind was the fact that she was alone out in the wilderness. Her clothing was obviously a uniform, though not one he knew until she named it for him as part of the Holy Kingdom. Her answer when they began talking had been, "I'm a squire, and because of my skill with archery, hunting, and scouting, it's my job to go out into the wild areas where demi-humans sometimes slip through. If I can kill them, I do. If I can't, it's my job to bring that information back to my superiors." It sounds dangerous, Olisar Dark had said, and her answer struck a nerve. It's a suicide mission. I got sent out here as a punishment for a terrible crime. Naya admitted with a snort, raising a hand before he could ask. I let some demi-human children live. They were weak, pathetic, crying little things. I killed off the rest, but I tried to let them run away. I got caught. This is to teach me a lesson: never show mercy to anything that isn't human. It didn't take, obviously. More fool me, she'd said and sewn up his wings. She didn't speak much about her time with the paladins, and he hadn't asked except to almost demand to know, how are you still alive? Her answer was self-deprecating. My father is one of the greatest archers in the country, my mother is one of the greatest paladins in the country. They've been teaching me since I was old enough to walk. Though I could have been more studious, and I'm not really exceptional, I worked very, very hard anyway. Though I never was able to make them proud, I practiced, and I'm at least passable in some ways. Good enough at least that I can stay alive out here. Olisar Dark had his doubts about this. Her being alive alone meant she was probably better than she herself believed, but he let the matter pass as she didn't seem to enjoy it. That led to weeks of idle hours when she wasn't away, passing the time in chatter with nothing else to do. Unable to move, he couldn't bark orders at someone who could just walk away. So, unthinkable as it was, he spoke to her as a peer. Now she was gone until sleep took him, and when he awoke, Naya had still not returned. However, he was not alone. He could smell them, almost taste them. Demi-humans. A fair number. Albedo was practically prancing to her master's room. My lord has a penis, now I can have his baby. She sang the little song in her head and wore a bright smile across her face. Weeks and weeks of work had gone into uniformly imposing new standard laws on the lands acquired from the Baharuth Empire. Then more with Shiltir's help understanding the lizardmen, and then even more with Demiurge's aid regarding the dwarves and the surviving Quagua. Then there were the diplomatic matters. The Wolf King and Queen of the Kingdom of Kani were requesting vassalage that blended independence with subordination. The Riesti's kingdom's new queen, hearing about the possible integration into the Kingdom of Nazarick, was quick to compete, but at least that one was intelligent on a level that rivaled even Demiurge. Then there was the Baharuth Empire. Their emperor is well above average intelligence, but the loss of his army and his knights has him scrambling. She thought, recalling the petition for a peace conference to prevent any more misunderstandings from causing international conflict in the future. More like, if I don't solve this I may lose both my throne and my head. Still, he showed self-awareness, and it seemed possible that the Baharuth Empire might look for a similar outcome just for the sake of avoiding a civil war. Then there were the two teams sent under Sabos to the Draconic Kingdom to help fend off the Beastmen invasion. The slain theocracy's retired Black Scriptures were there too, and one of their cardinals, a former Black Scripture himself, had reached out to speak of joint operations for the security of all those who wished to live in peace. On top of that was the Adventurers Guild to be established. The work never ended. But all that was secondary. Her master was summoning her to his own chamber, making all the weeks away, both for himself and for her, utterly worth it. Should I enter his chamber naked? Or maybe with just an apron? The books on this subject in the library of Ashurbanipal had been appallingly contradictory, some offering even the absurd advice that a woman treat her would-be lover coldly and withdraw from him. I'd have burned those if the librarian hadn't reminded me that they were not written regarding the seduction of supreme beings. Still, her frustration had not lessened, and so she wore her typical white with a spiderweb top that exposed ample cleavage. The memory of his first touch of her breast was still something she teased herself to nightly, an invitation to more. So much more. And she longed to do it all. Her wings fluttered with anticipation, her entire body on pins and needles as she pictured his hungry eyes guiding hungry hands over every perfect curve. She knocked. "My lord, you summoned me?" "Come in, Albedo," Ayn said from beyond the door. She entered, took one look at him and dove at his feet. "My lord. My love. I've missed you. I've missed you more than I can express." The emotion burst forth from the deepest recesses of her heart. So long away from him, she'd bottled it all up, and now here he was. "Should I just undress here? Or would my lord prefer to simply tear my clothing away?" Albedo's voice was going to a steadily higher pitch, and Ainz could feel the tension and desire alike rise in the room and in himself. He was sitting at his desk, which meant that Albedo had him essentially cornered. His familiar sense of shame and guilt for changing her washed over him again. If he'd been honest with himself, he could have overtly acknowledged that was part of why he held back on telling her the truth. Her rejection of him would hurt the most precisely because he'd already wronged her once and in a horrible way. "Albedo, I have a task for you," Ainz said, and the overseer of the Guardians did her best to keep her disappointment in check when she realized he was not about to ravish her utterly. Instead, she focused on the pleasure to be had in serving the one who stayed. "My lord." Albedo lowered her head and pressed a hand to her breast. "I stand ready to obey." Ainz threw his plan out of the window immediately. Her excitement at the thought of sex was, admittedly, thrilling to a certain part of him. However, his sense of responsibility for his friend's child still troubled him greatly, and there would be far too many opportunities if he took her to the Baharuth Empire for a conference. So, flailing for an answer, he grabbed the nearest thing he could think of, far from home, busy still, and a way to keep her engaged while testing her faithfulness in him under any circumstances. "I'm sending you to the Holy Kingdom," Ainz said. "I want them brought under our sway." Albedo was briefly caught by surprise. "My lord, so far away?" "They border the slain theocracy," Ainz remarked. "You remember them, don't you?" Albedo stopped. She did, and the old rage came back again. Nigun was still alive, though very much wishing he was not. That man dared have others strike at my lord. My love. They sought to cause him pain. Outrage at the very thought coursed through her blood like burning acid. They make a habit of interfering in the affairs of other countries, and other than Baharuth, they are the strongest and oldest human nation. Their war with the elves continues to progress, and I believe they are holding back, trying not to appear too strong, disguising strength as weakness. Ainz was making things up out of whole cloth, thankfully behind his mask, and in his red and black robes with their heavy draping cloth, nothing gave him away. "I see." "Yes, my lord. And they probably know or suspect that you were involved in the incident with the scripture," Albedo concluded, "so you want to have them surrounded from every side before plunging the knife into their hearts once and for all. That is wise, very wise." Ainz seized on her imagined understanding. Yes, that's it exactly. You must bring them into the fold by whatever means you deem fit. I will join you when it is time to play my part." Albedo's head raced faster than hurricane winds as her brilliant mind flew through all the realms of possibility and how to bring the nation under his sway with the greatest alacrity. "What resources am I permitted to use, my lord?" Albedo asked as multiple realms of possibility opened up. "Whatever you need. I don't wish to rule ruins, however, so try to keep the destruction to a minimum. No decimating the population," Ainz said, and, unsure of what else to do, he reached out and put a black-gloved hand on Albedo's head. "You can do this, I have the utmost faith in you." Albedo's heart sang songs of victory as he gave her his faith, his trust, and a personal assignment that would see him come to her side in time. When he drew back his hand, she sprang to her feet and bowed deeply at the waist, her words filled with the greatest joy and happiness, eager beyond the ability of her voice to describe. She all but shouted. "Hail to the Allfather, Ainzul Gaun, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, God of Gods. And my deepest, deepest love." I will see you again in a few months, and count the hours until then. Ah, see that you do, Albedo, Ein said with all the dignity he could muster. That buys me some time, but how can I tell her? He asked, and no answer came. When he slept that night, only heady dreams of being enfolded into her arms kept him company, and like his waking hours, they too deprived him of the answer he sought. Volume 5 C2. Damn them. Olisar Dark growled. They remained prowling in the periphery of his vision. The stench of their bodies in his nose was impossible not to notice, but with freezing breath instead of flame, there was only so much he could do to keep them at bay. Come out and fight, he bellowed. No, someone shouted back. A crude arrow flew out of the woods and struck his scales. It pinged off, useless, but it inflamed the temper of the dragon. He tried to move, his limbs were stronger than before, but he was hobbled, and he had to worry about re-injury. Then go away. My Olisar Dark started to shout, then stopped. Friend? Comrade? Nurse? Caretaker? He wasn't quite sure what to call the curious squire that treated his wounds fearlessly under his eyes where most would have struck him down. Partner, will be returning soon, and when she does, the woods will not hide you. Olisar Dark bellowed. Better to boost her reputation a little bit for intimidation. Partner? Everybody knows dragons don't have partners. You're lying. You're tough, but we'll keep shooting, keep nicking away, and then we'll have dragon meat for weeks. The voice came from the beyond, and a crude spear with it, which bounced off Olisar Dark's nose. I do. The huntress of the wilds. The terror eyes, the bowmistress so feared by her own kind that they cast her out to hunt the monsters they dread. Olisar Dark pumped the squire up with titles and latched onto a story she mentioned. She slew your brethren wholesale, sparing only children to carry the tale of her work to you so that you would know not to come south into her domain. You must be beyond mad and desperate to attack me now. The dragon laughed at them, and the demi-humans out of view were quiet. His sharp hearing caught bits of what they said. There were some children who came north, who spoke of a short woman with horrific eyes who used a bow and killed all before her with such ease that nobody could draw close enough to even strike back. They didn't mention a dragon. Hey you, dragon, how'd you get hurt? The demi-human shouted back. Ask my partner. Olisar Dark made the answer utterly nebulous, and the demi-humans grew quiet. Slaying a wounded dragon was one thing, doing so while the one who wounded and tamed it was still around was another thing entirely. They withdrew, but he could smell them even if he couldn't hear them. They remained around him all morning. They remained around him all afternoon. Skulking, out of view. Occasionally a few emerged. They would fire a few arrows, throw a few spears, or come into view to draw his breath only for him to take a blow from somewhere else. Scratches emerged. They targeted his unhealed wounds and his eyes. Given enough time, an ant can kill a lion, as long as the lion can't move or fight properly. Olisar Dark cursed his life and ill luck. The moon was still high in the sky when he smelled fire. The demi-humans were shouting, and there was the faint smell of a human in the air. He heard the twang of a bow. A shriek of horror pierced the darkness. The twang of the bow came out several times, the smell withdrew, the demi-humans were up in arms, the whole camp besieging the wounded dragon was thrust into chaos. Their numbers dwindled. A shriek pierced the night and the smell of burning flesh lit the air. A burning deer ran through the woods, smoke leapt up wherever they ran, the camp was churned into madness out of view, and the bow twang went again, and again, and again. I told you my partner would come back. The frost dragon shouted into the night, and she has not had her strings cut, he bellowed as the little tribe fled back north again. Most of them, stoked by fears of being hunted in the darkness, broke and ran, vowing privately never to venture south again. One, however, was not so fortunate. Olisar Dark watched as his partner emerged from the burning woods dragging a wounded orc by the neck. She cast him down at the space between them as the flames continued to light up the darkness and block the moon with smoke. I caught one, Naya said, and pointed to the back of his knee where an arrow went through and through. Olisar Dark took a long look at her, seeing in the dark proved no obstacle, and as humans went, it was a good, fearsome look. Her armor was darkened, her face painted with shades of black mud. She had accented her eyes to give her naturally terrifying eyes an even more enhanced look. Her limbs were cloaked with an improvised woven leafy garment of sorts with woven moss wrapped around to make her blend into the environment. No wonder they couldn't see her. Most would use magic, but most look for magic too. Clever. Before then, cleverness as a form of strength had not occurred to him, and yet between the burning deer to create chaos and the natural way she hid herself so that she seemed to come and go like an ephemeral demon was clearly enough to turn the tide. "Is he for me to eat?" Olisardak asked. "If you want," Naya said, though her face went a little greener than the bulky orc when he said it. "But I was hoping he would consider an apology and a promise never to return." Naya added. "Yes. I'm sorry. Let me apologize. We were just hungry. We were desperate. Things are bad. Clan wars, hunger, we were driven south, there was nowhere we could go. We couldn't let our children starve. You have to understand. We were desperate." The orc was muscle-bound in principle, but a closer look revealed he was clearly leaner than he had once been, his belt was tighter, his body was shaking in pain. She knocked an arrow and drew back her bow, putting it to the square of his back. "Please. I have a family. I have a wife. I have daughters. If I die, they'll suffer. Let me go. I'm sorry. I just wanted to save them." The orc was begging, pleading, he rolled onto his back, his arms out, tears in his deep-sunk eyes. "I'll leave. I'll never lead my people back here again. I promise." "You're their leader?" Naya asked, her bow relaxed a little. He gave a tiny nod. "Pity got me into this damn mess." She cursed herself. Killing when necessary was one thing, but this was different. "The gods must truly hate me," Naya muttered, and relaxed the draw on her bow. "What is your name?" Naya asked. "Raven." The orc answered. "Can you walk, Raven?" Naya asked. "Hobble," he answered. Naya crouched and yanked the arrow out the other side of his injury. "Hobble home, Raven. Bless the day that the loathed of the gods was moved to pity, and a word of advice to you. When you cross back to your homeland, don't fight fair next time. Your daughters depend on winning, not honor." "Why you're letting me go?" Raven asked with disbelief and looked at the dragon behind his head. "If my partner doesn't mind?" Naya said, running with the dragon's identification of their status. Olisardak wasn't sure where she was going with what she was doing, but he grunted along. "He does not smell good to eat." "Then yes, you can go. Some of those deer probably died, gather their meat, avoid the flames, and—" "Oh, wait," Naya glanced at the dragon, "could you?" Olisardak made a quick guess at her intent and blasted out his frost breath as hard as he could, sweeping the trees and killing the worst of the spreading fires. "Tell the others what you've seen here, Raven." Naya's eyes loomed over him. "Spread the word to other tribes, do not come south, unless you wish to be hunted." Raven began to roll up and stand with terrible winces. "Your enemies will know your face, before you even know their names. Thank you. For my life," he muttered, and began to hobble away. When they were alone, the dragon spoke to her. "Why spare him? I'm a soldier, a paladin, a squire. I want to protect my people, but I don't want to be a murderess. He wasn't my enemy, his hunger was. He'll go north, live or die, and if he lives, he'll tell others what happened here. I'm despised by my people because I look like I loathe them more than I do. Considered an outcast among my order because I don't have the same overt hatred of demi-humans that they do. But, in combination, those two things mean I can create a useful reputation. As long as I'm smart, and don't encounter anything that is too much for me, I can protect my people without having to put up with them, and maybe both sides will be a little better off if we're not always trying to kill each other." "You don't hate them?" Olisardak asked. Naya shrugged it off and wiped her face clean of her improvised makeup. "No, it wasn't demi-humans that didn't want me, it was my fellow humans. They sent me out here expecting me to die, but I don't plan on dying, and I've still got a job to do," she said and glanced in the direction the orcs were fleeing. "So does he, and that's all there is to it. I'm sorry about the delay in getting back to you, by the way. I had to take the long route to avoid them and gather some supplies," Naya explained as she went to check Olisardak's injured limb. The sun was just creeping over the horizon then, giving her a better view of what had taken place in the night. "Supplies?" Olisardak asked. "Yes, I needed something to put the deer to sleep, so I had to find a particular plant, grind it into paste, and then hit them with it. I had to do the same with some flammable plants, make some improvised rope to tie to them, and... well, it's not easy, But once I had them going, it was just a matter of a normal hunt. Only the prey was two-legged. Orcs are not good in the forests, they're plains and hill dwellers. I had a natural advantage and they were spread out. Kill a few sentries with stealth to get inside their lines and the chaos was inevitable. Attack, retreat, attack again somewhere else. Fear did the rest. Fear is a powerful weapon if you know how to use it, she said and reached into her pack. I got what I needed for your wounds. You'll be able to walk again in probably another month, 2 at the most. And as long as you can keep from scratching, you should be able to fly by then too, Na said, a little bit sadly. Good. That is all. Did you learn how to do all that in your training to be a squire? Dark asked. Na shook her head, a little, but the Nine Colors Library had a lot on wilderness survival. I got access to their books and read all about what plants do what, the pictures helped, plus how to make the stuff that I did. I also got to study some of the strategies of generals in the past. One of them used oxen with burning tails to create a rout among his enemies. I didn't have oxen, so I used deer. Not as dramatic, but it worked. She grinned a bit. Is that so? Dark asked rhetorically and thought that over. Hobens was a proud city, not as old as Kamimiyako, nor as large as Winter, but a proud and prosperous city nonetheless. The throne room epitomized this, with bright white stone columns beneath a great high ceiling. The white throne of the queen was polished so much it might as well have been made of light. But the queen was not happy. No. The holy queen was aghast when she heard the report. That is expensive. Yes, my queen, but the border guards report an increased need for drills in times when the demi-humans do not invade. In the past, long periods of peace typically were followed by large-scale invasions. We must be at our peak. Their invasions are cheaper than the training because at least after that we can plunder the dead to offset the costs, and we don't have to pay those of our own who die. The minister said with a grimace. The queen shifted on her throne. Don't speak like that. Every life is precious. I want a kingdom where nobody will cry, and what greater sorrow is there than the loss of life? The minister bowed his head and stepped a pace away from the white throne. Next, we've had a string of nasty cases of corruption among public officials. Corruption isn't really that uncommon, but a number of these cases were very prominent and involved important people. What kind of corruption? Queen Kalka's perfect lips formed a thin little frown. Bribery, mostly. But blackmail and worse has become a serious problem too. Temples were especially hard hit. 2 mistresses have come out in public and accused high-ranking priests of a number of crimes, including pilfering temple funds for personal use. Outrageous. Kalka's slender fingers closed into fists. My queen, this is worse than outrageous. Kelet Custodio said from off to the left side. The queen was brought up short. Kelet? She asked with a more gentle voice than she used with the minister a moment ago. My queen, these have been coming out constantly for some time now. People are no longer going to judges, order has been breaking down. The Southern Holy Kingdom is taking issue with these scandals, saying they don't want to send their funds north to be squandered. Some of the paladins rode south with remedios, about collecting withheld funds only to be immediately rebuffed. And when I say rebuffed, I mean she stood at some gates blustering and then started riding back without a fight because they had children inside the walls. We look weak. And your rule has not been the most favored by the South. Kelet reached out to rest a hand on Queen Kalka's arm. The queen remained still, quiet, unsure. Are you saying we're facing civil war? Kalka barely breathed the word past her lips. The very idea was unthinkable on so many levels. Why don't we just send the demi-humans word that we're throwing a feast, then? The caustic criticism caused Kelet to withdraw her hand. My queen. I love my sister, but her idealism is often in the way. Perhaps consider sending someone else. We can't let the lesser nobles become emboldened. Kelet warned, and Kalka stiffened. I want a kingdom of justice, where nobody suffers. How can I get that if I attack my own people? She looked sideways at Kelet. Majesty, how can you not? We love your ideals, that is why we're here, but there is simply no way you can fulfill those ideals if the nobles and the churches turn against you, and no way to do it if the commoners don't trust you. Kelet closed the hand that touched the queen before, making it into a fist and holding it up. Majesty. Highness, she said in a hushed, desperate tone. If the people think the judges are taking bribes on the decisions of their cases, then the people will stop going before the courts for their disputes. They'll instead turn to murder, banditry, intimidation, theft, and more. If the people think the guards are criminals, and worse, if they're right, then the guards will just become well-armored thugs either in people's minds or in fact. Either one is bad. If the South cuts us off, how will we maintain the wall that keeps the demi-humans of the Abelian Hills out? That had everybody rendered quiet. With the theocracy's long war against the elves over more than 100 years in duration, the Abelian Hills had a free hand against their neighbors. Invasions from beyond the wall had been fought off in the past, but at great cost, and it required the strength of North and South alike in order to achieve that end. Divided, apart from the vast well of southern manpower and materials, the less populated northern Holy Kingdom's bulwark would be critically weakened. As the Holy Queen, Kalka had the obligation to keep the relationship between North and South secure, as well as keep her own more immediate domain solvent and incorruptible. If the South chose to not support her, she would be queen in name only, and likely either herself, or her head, would be removed. Announce an official inquiry into the activities of the judges and priests, a formal official investigation. We will stamp out corruption at the root and branch from our kingdom. She gave the order, and Kellett gave a courteous bow to her beloved queen. Her hair fell aside when she did, and the radiant and beautiful golden-haired queen briefly caught her breath with envy. Many had whispered that the queen and Kellett were engaged in a torrid affair. Something both laughed at in private. In truth, Kalka just had a professional appreciation for the woman's effortless beauty. Kalka's use of magic to enhance her beauty, not to mention her vigorous use of cosmetics, was less widely known outside of the palace. But because of her familiarity with it, she knew when someone else used none. So she appreciated and envied Kellett's effort-free presentability. Now, one more thing, wasn't there? The queen asked. Yes, my. Kellett coughed in her hand several times. Sister, sent a report that in the more wildlands, hunters have reported the sound of roars, painful ones. The word dragon popped up a lot. There was a massive fire out there as well. It burned quite a bit of woodland and then just stopped. The few rangers who go out beyond the wall to speak with the few semi-friendly demi-humans have said there are all kinds of rumors going around out there. She wants permission to investigate the region with some of her best. Remedios is very closely connected to my values. If she wants to investigate, I'm sure it is purely in the interests of the common good. Let her go, Queen Kalka asked. We all know she wouldn't do anything to bring harm to my people. What could go wrong? Kalka asked, and when nobody argued, she gave Kellett a nod of approval, and the order was given. Volume 5c3. Albedo sat in the public restaurant. Her seat outside was relatively comfortable as far as things went. A simple metal chair with a temporary cushion provided for comfort. The tea they served was passable enough. The food was garbage, but even disguised with magic she was sure no one here could pierce. She still wasn't willing to blow her cover with an outburst about the horrid fare that the Holy Kingdom considered high class. What interested her more was watching the judge's wife as the doppelganger approached her. They had high charisma by nature, and their passive mind reading let them tailor themselves to their targets. This one had gone a step further, and learned her preferences before deciding on his appearance. He was her ideal appearance. Albedo covertly targeted the woman. Aspect of the succubus, Lilith's hunger. She could smell the woman's arousal within seconds. The judge's wife, a prim-looking woman of younger years, honey blonde hair and still supple frame, wore her hair up in a bun. Without really thinking about it, she undid the security of her hair and let it tumble down her back. The chaste and devoted wife was trying to disguise the fact that she was rubbing her thighs together while the doppelganger agent sat across from her. A few subtle touches, and if Albedo had asked about her husband, I doubt she'd even remember his name. She laughed a little and watched the doppel rise, hold out his hand and whisper down to her. Come with me to fulfill your every wish. Faithless humans. Have they any idea how to seek any desires but their own? Albedo asked herself and watched the pair leave. The eighth couple today. Next would come the investigators, and more priests. Corrupted by the urges of their illicit lovers, they would sell their integrity for coins to buy the things their lovers wished. Albedo stood up, left more money on the table than the meal justified. She began to walk down the street. The evening hours were charming enough, at least with the moist air that blew in from the distant sea. The buildings were mostly of wood, but stone structures were not uncommon either. Even at a glance Albedo could see that the city was, as human ones went, a thriving one. More notably, they were fit specimens of their race, no doubt a result of their strongly military culture. The enduring threat of the demi-humans was never far from their minds here in the north. As a result, a life of readiness for war was the norm. That at least she found to be a somewhat admirable quality. It was at least enough to make it less repulsive to her than the degenerate Riastai's kingdom. She reached the temple soon enough. The last priest had been caught in a torrid affair and was removed. This one would suffer the same fate eventually. The temple was a large square structure with an angular rooftop. The stone steps led up to double doors of solid oak patterned in the armor-clad shapes of the great gods. Players. Albedo realized, and by the look of them, if the armor was true to life, not even the highest-ranking players. Gods. What a joke. She opened the door and went to the penitent booth. A little investigation revealed the times when the priests would be available, and a little more told her when the head priest would be present. A merchant man and wife of some significance attended here, both of good name. As many did. Albedo sat in the booth. Aspect of the succubus, curse item, secret desires. At her levels relative to humans, it was extremely unlikely that anyone would ever know anything was amiss, and all that would happen anyway was the pursuit of desires, regardless of the destructive cost. The priest opened his side, revealing a screen that revealed only the outline of a person on the other side. Albedo's eyes, however, were far better than average. He was a young man, meaning he must have been impressive enough to rise so high before his 30s. He had dark hair and a slender build, but his back was straight and his voice was strong. "Unburden yourself, the gods forgive all," he said. Out of a mere whim, she chose to put him to the test. Let's see how impressive he really is, she thought, and changed what she was going to say. Albedo's hypnotic voice passed from her lips to his ears. Voice of the gods, ear of the gods, there are so many things I wish to confess to the one I love. He feels astounding guilt over what he did to me. My beloved. He took me in when my father abandoned me. He became everything to me, sacrificed everything he loved for me, to stay with me and my younger siblings. But now? Now? The priest asked, a deep well of empathy packed into the tiny word. Now I want to love no one else but him. He is the man of my dreams, my everything and my all. I want to give myself to him, my body, my innocence, my heart. And yet he holds back. He feels like he's done something wrong, something unforgivable, and even though I can see the want in his eyes, he refuses me. What should I do? The priest was quiet. Dear child of the gods, there is no sin in desire alone. Even the gods had wants, needs, longings. If he has never mistreated you, never manipulated you on purpose into loving only him, then his guilt can only harm you. Help him to understand, you are an adult, a woman making her own choices, and whatever happened before, you understand, and you love him despite it. Help him to understand that you can both be happy, and embrace your desires in pursuit of the happiness that all children of the gods deserve. Only be good to one another, trust one another, rely on one another, and the gods will bless your union. A man so noble that he would care for a child that is not his, and whose greatest guilt is only that she came to love him in ways he did not expect, is a rare man, and a woman who would recognize that value, no less so. Love, be happy, and may you have many, many children. The curse that Albedo held ready to repeat against the priest on the other side was not unleashed. The last priest had rambled on about purity, 2 others at smaller temples condemned her lord as a manipulator and told her to flee. But this one got it. Though she couldn't explain about settings, and how his moment of whim was not intended to be expressed as it was, he understood her love for her master in a way that the others had not. And more than that, he offered a practical solution for how to approach him, to help him end his guilt. Evil for evil, good for good, she whispered the words too quietly for the priest to hear, the philosophy of her master, and she chose not to curse this one. But she would leave no useful tool unpicked up. A foil to the corruption was needed, someone who could pick up the pieces. I'm sorry? He caught the noise of her words, but not what they were. Nothing, listener of the gods. I have one more thing, however, a thing a good priest should know. What you do with this knowledge I leave to you. Yes? He asked, confusion evident in his voice. Corruption spreads like unchecked vines throughout this city. The judges' wives, the judges themselves, the public officials, bribes and skimming are frequent, which pay for the fulfillment of greed and lust. Your predecessor was one of those, but he is not alone. If you want to serve your people well, be prepared for great and terrible hardship to surround you. Albedo warned him. The priest was silent. I know we've had a great many incidents, but... No, priest, you know only of the ones who have been caught. The fools who were sloppy, it is worse than you can begin to imagine. So bad that I venture that you are the last honest man, Albedo said, restraining her corrupt and bedeviling smile. Good luck to you, priest of the great gods, from one of their daughters, and one who would be one of their lovers. Albedo then stood up, opened the door, and walked out, leaving the priest confused, entranced, and sweating in his booth, fear of tomorrow sinking into his guts that did not abate even long after the penitent booth was reoccupied a dozen more times after her going.